So good afternoon. This is the infamous after lunch session. So I won't be at all offended if you doze off during the time. You can't hear me. Is there a technician around? I can try and talk like this, but this feels a little bit like a pop singer who is always... Okay. Too many things. First of all, I just wanted to say that I am now totally anonymous. Within an hour of arrival, I lost my badge. So if you see someone going around as Zoltan Dornyei, greet them. It might be a man or a woman. Okay? So it is a real pleasure to be here, and thank you for coming. And you are a bit sad. Don't you realize that the sun is out there and we are next to the beach? So what I'm going to try to compensate you for, is I'm going to present a framework within 25 minutes, which would normally take about 3 hours to present, okay? So there's lots of material, and let me just try to organize myself. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is an issue which I think all of you have faced. Our students in language classrooms are shy. And actually, the problem is a bit bigger than that. Language as a subject matter at school is probably the most stressful of all. And in a way, can we really blame, let's say, our teenage students who think about this and who say, this is the only subject matter where I cannot probably say a simple sentence without possibly being embarrassed. And so they decide, okay, the safest thing is to be quiet, especially for teenagers, but also for adults, kind of saving face, kind of maintaining their self-worth is one of the most important things. And actually what we language teachers would like to do is making them stick their necks out, saying things in a foreign language which they can't really say. So it's very, very difficult. So what this talk is going to be about trying to create an environment, a psychological environment in the classroom, which might actually make the students' task easier. So here is the problem in some figures. This is a survey which Cambridge University Press has conducted with lots of students around the world. By the way, there is a kind of handout which you find, which is not really a handout, but it's almost like an addition to this talk. It's a little booklet which contains lots of practical ideas, which I won't have time to go into. And also it contains some more material about this big survey which Cambridge University Press have conducted. So this is the result, which you can see. So what do you find most difficult in English? And it's not even close, so speaking is by far the most challenging aspect. Okay, I can hear it's been turned up, the volume, thank you. And then here is a quote, a typical quote. You must have heard variations of this many, many times. Honestly, I get nervous sometimes. And then here is a quote from a teacher, again from the Cambridge database, that getting students to stop being embarrassed or shy is difficult. They sometimes don't want to answer or speak because they are scared they'll get it wrong. So it's a very, very familiar situation, and I think it's something which is almost universal. So in this presentation, I'd like to actually do two things in the few minutes I've got. One is, I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out what, I can see this, I can't see this one because I haven't got my glasses on, but I don't want to turn around. But probably I'll put, sorry, this. can't see it even with my glasses. Okay, so, but I don't want to step down because then you can't see me from, okay. All right, I'll stop moaning. So in this talk, I would like to argue that in order to facilitate speaking in the language classroom, we need to do two things. One is to create suitable conditions in accordance with the main tenets of group dynamics. So this is a kind of general psychological environment, a conducive psychological environment. And the second thing is apply the principles of safe speaking environment. And this safe speaking environment is something which has been distilled by Cambridge University Press, by their research team. You'll see it's got 5 main principles. So I'm going to actually do this kind of twofold job. First, to try to describe what kind of conditions need to be in place in order to be able to, in a way, even start kind of implementing the second part of the talk, the 5 principles of a safe speaking environment. And so let's start with creating the necessary conditions. And here, this is where group dynamics comes in. And I don't know whether you know about group dynamics as a discipline. It's actually quite a developed kind of subdomain in the social sciences. It's very big, probably bigger than applied linguistics, because group dynamics is part of organizational psychology, which looks at leadership groups, business management groups. So you can imagine that there's the stakes are high. So a company like, IBM or Apple, they would want their management teams to work perfectly as a group. So they are ready to actually invest into research. And where there is money, there is research. But group dynamics has a lot of implications for the educational context. And in this case, I would like to argue that because most organized learning goes on actually in some kind of group context, it is very relevant for us. What we find is that the characteristics of a group, so whether you have a good group or a bad group, massively impacts on the quality and the quantity of learning. So, and in a way, this would imply that a knowledge of group dynamics for language teachers would actually be a tool to consciously create optimal, productive learning environments. While this, I believe, is the case, and I really believe that group dynamics is perhaps one of the most useful disciplines for educators and language teachers in particular, there is very little training in group dynamics. Most people never heard of it. So this is something which has traditionally not been on the kind of syllabi of various kind of pre-service or in-service training courses. Now, I would like to actually argue that in order to create a kind of conducive work environment, there are 2 things which need to be in place. 2 group characteristics we should focus on, and one is group cohesiveness and group norms. And I won't have much time to go through this, so I'm going to just outline the issues. So group cohesiveness refers basically how someone, a group member, a student, relates to other students, or how it relates to the group itself. So basically, it's partly about the pride of being a group member, but also how comfortable the person is within the group. It's something like how the group hangs together. And there is ample research showing that the cohesiveness of a group, which can be measured by paper and pencil kind of tests, correlates significantly in a positive manner with the productivity of the group. So how, let's say an organizational group, a group in the industry, how productive they are. So that can be measured in terms of actual output, and also with how people engage with the group. Now, this is unfortunately, I think, one of the most kind of useful slides for you, but I won't have much time to go into this. The point is that there are quite a few specific strategies which can help us to create good groups. And they are not even very difficult to do. And they work, and they are not risky. So in a way, what we normally say is that, oh, it's almost like a question of luck whether we have a good or a bad group, is not necessarily true. You can create good groups, and I listed here 8 factors. So first of all, simply learning about each other will help. I teach within a university context, and it's so common in seminars, university seminars, that students don't even know each other's names. And I bet that this is the same in language classes sometimes. Now, how can there be a cohesive group if even the basic information is missing? Okay? But there are lots of good activities which will help students to learn about each other as complex, rich human beings. Okay? Now, what they find was that simply being near to each other, having casual interactions, which is contact, or having purposeful interactions, which in psychology is called interaction, will actually help. And just to give you one example, the famous scene in lifts or elevators, because they confine you in a space which is within the proximity threshold, you have the feeling that you share something in common. You should say something to the people traveling. Now, this is this wonderful thing about this list. These are kind of strategies or factors which we don't quite know why. They will just increase group cohesiveness, and we can actually manipulate them quite easily. Cooperation. It's basically, the fact is, if you have worked with someone together towards a common goal, you are going to like the person more. So again, setting up cooperative situations in which you can actually kind of develop this works wonderfully. Competition, I don't know when all of us have been in sports teams competing against others. And if we win, but even if we lose, we feel so close to our teammates. The same thing is true. Even within class, you can have small group competitions. You can put together students who don't actually get on well with each other, and once they've won the competition, they will be best friends. Okay. Then, strangely enough, investing in the group, so investing energy, in this case, we are not talking about money, but energy, time, will increase a person's feeling of belonging to the group. So what I did in one class, I asked students to do a massive piece of homework on week 2, so that in a second class. And when they have done it and they've come back, they more or less, they are kind of committed group members. Okay? Extracurricular activities, this is well known in the industry, in the marketplace. If you want to get, kind of colleagues together, you take them something like mountain climbing or whitewater rafting in Britain. So you take them out of the workplace and make them do something quite difficult and challenging and exotic. And again, when they go back, it's like the relationship has completely changed qualitatively. Okay? Strangely enough, joint hardships, they are very, very powerful, and which I first learned when we were waiting for, students waiting together before an exam which we dreaded. And we could have hugged each other. We felt like being the victims. And that, again, brings people together. Now, I'm not sure what the implications of that is for language classes. And finally, we teachers model attitudes. So basically, our students constantly look at us. They watch us. They know everything we do. So if we kind of demonstrate in practice what we mean by being inclusive, being tolerant, being, they will actually follow that. Sorry, rushing forward. Group norms. Now, group norms are the kind of rules, regulations which govern classroom lives. Some of these norms are quite explicit, but some of these norms kind of emerge spontaneously or are transferred from other contexts. So, for example, if someone here stood up now and started to sing an Italian opera kind of aria, everybody would look at the person knowing that this is wrong, which means that's a proof that there is a rule that we mustn't sing Italian opera in a lecture. Now, this is obviously never mentioned in the IATEFL kind of how to behave, how best conduct list. But there are lots of rules like this. There's one thing which is important, that rules are inherently social products, so they need to be explicitly discussed, then accepted, and by the majority of the group, if we want to introduce a kind of norm. And unproductive norms, something we want to get rid of, again, the best thing is to address them head on and then, kind of decide against them with a, change by consensus. I'm going to mention briefly three typical norms. This is the norm of mediocrity. This is the big baddie in education. Basically, it's not done to do well in the class. You will be called names. And that's clearly a bad one. It's got to be changed. Then the norm of tolerance, it's a good one. And finally, the norm of effort and perseverance. Again, it's a good one. Tolerance is particularly important in language classes where we are going to commit errors, and that's what students are afraid of, as we saw in a quote earlier. You've got to actually convince people that errors are okay. We accept people with their errors as they are. In fact, if there are no errors, that means that people are not trying. So that's more worrying, okay? And the norm of effort and perseverance is simply never accept that I'm not good at languages. Everybody can learn a language. It takes effort. So it's not ability. Okay, I'm rushing on because now I'd like to actually build on this by presenting Cambridge University Press's research group's kind of distilled set of 5 recommendations of how to create a safe speaking environment in the classroom. Okay? They are rooted in positive classroom dynamics, and you'll see some of them are directly related to what we have said, I've said. Some of them are kind of indirectly. So, principle number 1, allowing adequate time and space for speaking in the syllabus and in individual lessons. And you would think that this is, self-evident, but the fact is that we don't actually very often. Automatization, which in psychology, basically fluency is called automatization, and we know it very well from skill learning theory that it takes time. It's just like, it's exactly the same thing as when you learn to drive and you are already the practice stage. You simply have to put in the hours to become an automatic driver and a safe driver. Now, syllabus priorities very often work against this, because very often exams dominate, and most exams won't have a proper speaking component simply because it's too expensive. So, entrance exams for universities and all, I think you know this very well. So the first thing is we have to give speaking simply a chance by giving it, spending enough time. The second thing is what's called immersing learners in activities where speaking English almost feels incidental to the task. So when it's by incidental, it means it's kind of natural. So when the task drives the communication, and obviously in communicative language teaching, that has been a principle from day one. You know, how to create communicative tasks which approximate communication, real communication as much as we can. And of course, quizzes, games, there are ways when students can forget about being students and just, you know, enjoy the task. Also, one thing is which is really useful in this respect is when you set up tasks when students can collaborate. So kind of project work, role play activities, because that takes almost like takes the edge off. So when you know that you are not exposed yourself, but it's kind of teamwork, you can get support from others, that makes it much more natural and students relax more. The third principle is using student-selected topics for discussion to increase engagement. Now, one thing which personalized tasks by definition create autonomy and ownership, and this kind of, this feel of realness and authenticity is a big motivational force. And just to give you one example, one of my most successful language tasks at the very beginning of my teaching, when I was teaching English in Hungary, it was still communist Hungary, and we were using building strategies. You know, that was my first course book. I will never forget Barbara Cartland, the shoe shop manager, and there was also a Canadian electrical engineer in that. And what we did, there was this wonderful dialogue, and all I asked my students is to kind of rewrite the dialogue as if it happened in Hungary or at home. And it was hilarious. You know, in the shoe shop, there were no shoes because they ran out. Or when there was a family scene, you know, which was lovely and cozy, and the students actually produced a massive quarrel, and they say, that's what always happens on Sundays, you know. And suddenly, they are motivated. Okay, fostering positive interaction between peers. And you can see this is directly related to cohesiveness. The point here is that by actually students learning about each other, interacting with each other, they can reach a psychological state which is called acceptance in contrast to attraction. Acceptance is something when you accept someone as a human being with, you know, with perhaps some faults, but who is one of us. Like an uncle or aunt who drinks and sometimes kicks the dog, but we still like him. Or perhaps not. Okay. One good way of fostering positive interactions, which comes from cooperative learning, you know, the methodology, is to give students roles. Students actually love having some roles, that you are the secretary, you are the timekeeper. So I'm not just talking about role play activities, you are the shop assistant and you are the customer, but also some kind of group roles. Your task is to make sure that everybody communicates. They like that because they have something to do and which they can understand. And finally, providing appropriate feedback on learners speaking. Now, this is quite difficult. Lots of things can go wrong. So far, you've got everything right, and the feedback can spoil everything, because the issue here is that you want to give meaningful feedback, but it cannot be intrusive to the task. Okay, so you don't want to discourage people. You don't want to stop the task and say, oh, let's just say this again, for obvious reasons. So what do you do? Well, there are, you know, books written about this, but this is what I would say, that one thing you must avoid is this sense that the students are being judged, okay? Because that creates a mindset, you know, like that. But actually, some of the best feedback is not really focusing on what you didn't get right, but things which could have made things better. So offering useful additional resources, saying that many of you use this, use this language function, in the let's say, role play activities. Here's a useful phrase which you can use next time in that. So that kind of feedback students find very, very inspiring. Okay, I'm already 1 minute after, I should have finished, so a concluding slide. So once again, I'd just like to actually allow you to see the 5 principles, which, as I say, has come out of quite a lot of research by the Cambridge University Press research team, talking to students, surveys, talking to teachers, and basically what they found was, and I fully endorse these 5 principles, that if those 5 principles are in place, then you cannot go very wrong. You still may not be perfect, but then they actually should, students then have a chance, okay? So once again, we should actually give time and space for speaking, which very often we don't. We should have activities where, where students are immersed as naturally as they can in an activity. The more they enjoy it, the better. Students should select topics. It should be all personalized. So easy to do, and it's so rare that we do it, whereas it works. There should be positive peer interaction, which actually reminds us of the group dynamics. There needs to be an environment where, so these principles cannot work in an environment which is not kind of in line with the principles of group dynamics. Let's say when students don't even know each other's names. None of these things will work. And finally, finding a way of feedback which actually suits you and the class as well, which students find useful rather than intimidating. Thank you very much.